We walked to a pizza joint and sat down with our slices. We hadn't been talking for 5 minutes when Peter blurted out, "I have a 9-inch dick." I didn't know what to say. Pass the cheese? Peter could barely read or spell, and he wasn't a thinker. As for any other drummers, the ones he couldn't play like, he disliked them all. Peter also didn't understand the basics of song structure, verse, chorus, bridge. It all meant nothing to him. If I said, "Let's pick up at the second verse," he just sat there. He had to memorize a song from beginning to end, and if we stopped in the middle or he lost his place, he was fucked. Peter had said, "I want to thank my friends from Canarsie for coming out tonight." That did not sound big league. Peter was not what you'd call an intellectual. This type of needless drama became part of the way he operated. Peter was up to his usual shenanigans, threatening to quit the band just as we thought we were on the verge of taking a step forward. Peter said, "Bullshit. People say shit like that all the time." We talked Peter through the songs as we recorded them. I had a microphone into which I had to say things like, "Okay, here comes the dat-dat-dat," or "Now the rat-a-tat-tat." It was the only thing that worked. Peter seemed to resent everything he was given. It was a no-win situation. The fact that he was given things further highlighted his inability to contribute. He began to vent his inner turmoil and feelings of insecurity by trying to make everyone else as miserable as he was inside. Peter also resented me for not paying my dues, as he constantly put it. As far as I saw it, Peter hadn't succeeded before hooking up with us because he had no idea what it took to become successful or to sustain success. Now he was along for the ride and couldn't help trying to hamper things and create strife. But I definitely begrudged Peter's attitude, the animosity and conniving. "If you don't put it back in," Peter told us, "I'm quitting the band." When we were working on it at Village Recorder, Peter said, "Either I sing that song or I'm quitting the band." Bob spent many hours teaching Peter his parts. Bob came up with most of the drum parts on the album, and he would dismiss the rest of us for hours at a time to work with Peter. Detroit Rock City in particular had a very challenging drum beat, and it took a lot of effort and patience for Bob to get Peter to be able to play something he couldn't have learned to play on his own if his life had depended on it. Peter had a co-writer on every song he ever wrote because he couldn't really write. Song structure and concepts like making your lyrics rhyme were totally lost on him. Bob had to record Peter singing the song probably a dozen times and cobble together a single version from the passable parts of those takes. Peter's chances of being able to sing a song off the cuff were about as good as my chances of throwing a penny and hitting the moon. It would be a challenge for him to carry a tune in a bucket. Even if we sang a note to him, he couldn't find it. At some point, Peter began to believe his own press. Peter and Ace's contributions were never as substantial as we made them out to be in the press. Those fissures first started opening during Destroyer, as Peter struggled to record a song that was ostensibly his own. In theory, even a chimpanzee beating on pots and pans could sound thunderous in the right environment. But still, the drums sounded tinny. I had to record a vocal for Peter to follow, and again, he took many takes to provide enough material to cobble together a finished version. Peter lashed out when we worked on his songs, but the problem wasn't that Gene and I rewrote his songs. The problem was that the things Peter brought in weren't songs to begin with. The lyrics never rhymed. There weren't any delineations between verse and chorus. They were scraps, not songs. So Peter always pushed his buddies' ideas and made a stink if anyone suggested they weren't quite up to scrub. Peter spent all his emotional energy worrying about his place in the hierarchy without the ability to be honest with himself about the quality of what he brought to the table. When we argued with Peter over his songs, he'd say things like, "You just don't want me to do this because I wrote the biggest song," or "You don't want me to do this because I'm the best singer." And he constantly accused me of not having paid my dues. Peter's insecurities got more and more crippling with the addition of drugs. The whole world was against him. One day in the studio, he exploded about something and smashed my acoustic 12-string guitar against the wall. During another argument, Gene snapped at Peter, "Peter, you're an illiterate idiot who can't read or even talk correctly and never finished school." I think in Peter's case, it had to do with his upbringing and the fact that he wasn't very bright. And Peter, from Destroyer on, what the band wanted to do, push the limits of his abilities or simply outstrip them. Peter couldn't play the kick drum pattern on the song. Once Peter cut the track, we had to bring in another drummer to play the extra kick drum beats Peter couldn't. We weren't speaking to each other. We couldn't stand each other. But for Vinny, this was a job, and Peter was no longer capable of playing what was asked for and needed. Peter seemed to have completely lost it. He had become your slightly nutty uncle. He came in with some silly miniature tribal drums that he held in one hand and boinked with a stick. He wanted to hit them while he sang Beth. Peter was completely unmanageable. Whatever we did was never right. If we let him sleep late on a day off, he would get angry and say he wanted to travel on the off day. If we traveled on an off day, he would say he wanted to sleep. If he said it was too hot backstage, we turned up the air conditioning. Then he complained it was too cold. One time he punched a mirror and got a serious deep cut on his hand that needed microsurgery and stitches. It wasn't unusual for Peter to throw his drumsticks at me or Gene or Ace if we stepped in front of his drum riser. Never mind that he was up on a drum riser, meaning we didn't block the audience's view of Peter even if we did pass in front of his kit. If he wants to be at the front of the stage, he should learn to play the damn guitar. But then one night, near the end of the tour, in December 1979, Peter had been binging on drugs and playing particularly erratically. When I turned around during one song and let him know his tempo was too frantic, his reaction was to start slowing songs down and then speeding them up again, apparently out of spite. Peter's purposeful sabotaging of the show was the ultimate treachery. We decided we wanted Peter gone. Even so, the guy working with Peter was aghast, not only at how weak he was and how low his endurance was, but also at how little Peter was willing to work. The trainer said it was like working with an old man. And Peter? Peter was another story. There was no point to rehearsing as a band. Peter and Ace didn't know the material, didn't know their parts. Playing with Peter is like playing with someone who picked up drumsticks for the first time today. It's like he's never played before. He doesn't remember anything, and he can't play. And Peter would shout at him aggressively, "Don't you fucking tell me how to play drums." Peter, in particular, seemed completely lacking in world experience. Peter constantly felt disrespected by hotel staff, for instance. His tendency was always to become dependent on someone and cut himself off from everybody else by using his girlfriend as a buffer. Peter had enough trouble keeping time on a single bass drum and snare, so the idea of him playing two bass drums was out of the question. In the meantime, Peter's abilities had greatly deteriorated. Although Peter had played with fire in the 70s, he was a shadow of himself now. On the reunion tour, he hit the drums like he was worried his arms would snap if he did anything more than barely tap them. Peter reminded me of a small animal. When it's afraid, it's timid, but when it feels protected, it shows its teeth. And at that moment, Peter turned to me and said, "I'm sick and tired of this hard day's night shit." The atmosphere in the band was much better without Peter's constant negativity to contend with. We weren't going to put on a show because Peter's hands hurt. Another night, Peter had a new problem. He stopped playing in the middle of a song and just held his sticks up and looked at me like a deer in the headlights. Peter was marginal when the reunion started, and his playing had gone downhill since. His drum solos were an embarrassment. Without